All right, hello. Welcome back to another episode of Star Wars Marco Balance. My name is Mark, and today we are going to be talking about the series finale of the Bad Batch TV show, Season 3, Episode 15, The Cavalry Has Arrived. Now, before I jump into the review, I do want to just start this with a nice trip down memory lane and give Bad Batch some flowers, because it is the first Star Wars TV show that I did weekly reviews for since I started the podcast all the way back in 2021. I remember it released on May 4th, 2021. I started this podcast in January 2021. I was living at home and I recorded a video version of the podcast to review the 70-minute premiere in my basement. And even though I don't think the show ever lived up to my expectations or reached its full potential, I still have a soft spot for the show just because it's kind of been with the podcast since day one, and it's the only Star Wars show that I've reviewed from premiere to finale. So shout out to Bad Batch. I know we've had a rocky relationship. I've been pretty hard on you throughout your run, but you've also had some really amazing moments where I've given you your flowers, and I've tried to get you out there to a broader audience and tell people about how good the Bad Batch can be when it's doing these very intimate character-focused episodes like Crosshair at the Outpost, or some of the more geopolitical, broader scale episodes with Senator Chuchi, and looking at what happens to a republic when it starts to shift into an empire. When it was in that pocket, the show reached heights that I think were close to Clone Wars or Rebels. All right, so now that I got all the sappy stuff out of the way, it's time to dive into the actual series finale here and tell you guys my thoughts on it. Overall, I did enjoy this finale. I think it hit the feels when it needed to. I think the music did a lot of heavy lifting. Kevin Kiner, again, blew it out of the water. He did such a beautiful job with this final episode in particular. I think there was a lot of tense moments where I wasn't sure if characters were going to live or die. I think a large part of me was hoping that we would see a little bit higher of a body count from this finale, and I think a lot of people were expecting that. But the Bad Batch comes out pretty unscathed. We do have some notable deaths in this finale, but they're all side characters, and I think that was very surprising to me. I think a lot of moments throughout this finale, I was ready for Echo to bite the dust. I thought Wrecker was definitely going to die at one point, and they never pulled the trigger on it. And I think with this time period and the doom and gloom surrounding the Republic to the Empire, I think it would have been a little bit more poignant of an ending if we did lose another main character, but they opted for the more hopeful spark in the darkness type of ending, which is not a bad thing. I mean, Star Wars definitely is at its best when it has that hopeful ending, even if there is some bittersweetness to it. So I can appreciate that, at least to a degree. I still think they pulled a punch, and I think that's just a microcosm of the show as a whole. I feel like they've pulled their punches a lot throughout the show, and that's what's held it back from being on the level of Clone Wars and Rebels. My biggest criticism of Bad Batch is that it pulled its punches too much, and it sometimes wanted to be a kid's show, and other times it wanted to be this really deep, complex war drama about post-war veterans and how they survive in the galaxy and how a republic turns to an empire. But I think they went with the more safe, happy ending here where, well, it's actually a great ending for everyone. Like, everything works out almost perfectly for everyone in the Bad Batch and associated with the Bad Batch, even Emery as well. So let's dive into the actual episode. So the Bad Batch are breaking into Tantus. Omega is working with the Force-sensitive children to break out of Tantus, while Echo and Emery are in Tantus base trying to help out in any way they can. So I'll start with my main gripe with this series finale, and that's that a lot of things feel very convenient and some things just get tied up way too easily. The first convenience is Omega and the Force-sensitive children being able to openly discuss their plan to escape in a room where they're being highly monitored by scientists. Like, the room is literally surrounded by glass and scientists at these computers monitoring these children, looking at their vitals. How are they able to just talk out loud about escaping? There's no microphones. The droids in there aren't listening. Like, they're just able to talk about it. I know some people might be like, oh, that's a nitpick, but I really don't think it is. I think it's just very lazy writing to have Omega hatch this plan to get out. They don't have to outsmart the guards. They don't have to outsmart how they're going to escape and hide their plans from the scientists that are observing. There's only one scientist like looking at them, and it's crazy. It's like, what are the other scientists doing? This is the most important part of Mount Tantus. So that part bothered me, and that was the opening of this episode of them escaping and hatching the Zillo Beast, which again, very simplistic writing. You knew the writing was on the wall last week when Omega gets out. She sees the Zillo Beast. You're like, yep, they're going to release that and it'll cause havoc. Wish there was more subtle ways that the writing team could have teased that the Zillo Beast was coming instead of making it so obvious. And I'll get into some more of those conveniences a little bit later on in the episode when I get to those moments. But I want to talk about something I really liked, and that was when Crosshair, Hunter, and Wrecker are outside Tantus, and Crosshair's like, I'm going in by myself. I deserve to go in by myself. And Hunter and Wrecker are like, nope, we signed up for this. We knew the risks. Tech knew the risks. We're all going in together. And I love that because it's one of those moments where the Bad Batch, again, felt like this squad that had been working together for so long. I feel like in previous seasons, it felt like they were just a group of people that worked together and there wasn't that camaraderie. But here, I really felt the love between them and that they were in this together. And Tech was there on their shoulder and Echo was somewhere else doing his part. And I think this was the best example of the Bad Batch working together as a group, maybe in the whole show. And it wasn't even in the middle of an action scene. It was a dialogue-focused scene, which I think Bad Batch needed to do more of throughout its run and have these moments of characters just talking, which was so impactful when we get into the next scenes where they start moving through the base that's on fire and they're tapping each other's shoulders and they're moving out and they're moving like a special forces unit. Again, something I hoped to see more of from the first episode. I wanted to see more of these special ops type of missions. And a lot of the time they just ended up fighting monsters. So they didn't have opportunities to do the spec ops type missions. So I loved seeing that in the finale. And I understand that The Bad Batch as a show was telling more of a story that was about the Bad Batch trying to avoid more conflict. It wouldn't have made sense if they were taking out Imperial bases or fighting back against the Empire directly, because then that would go against the theme of the show, which is trying to avoid war and choosing your own path. So I understand they couldn't really do Spec Ops missions, but I think they wrote themselves into that corner, and I think, unfortunately, what they did decide to do with the Bad Batch was a lot of these Adventure of the Week, Monster of the Week episodes that just felt like a group of clones taking on a mission instead of a highly trained group of clones taking on very difficult missions that only they could succeed in. But sorry, I feel like I was going on a rant there about special forces. The Zillo Beast has another, good outing here. They're very good at destroying things and getting out, and I like that he just ran off into the sunset through the woods. That was awesome. I think my favorite part of this episode outside the music was Echo being front and center. He pretty much leads the clone rebellion with Omega. He gives the passionate speech to get the rescued clones on their side to free everyone from Tantus and destroy the research. He and Emery are critical to saving the kids and helping Omega get out of Tantus with the Force-sensitive kids. I just love that he finally got his time in the spotlight, because I think me, like many of the people that have watched Bad Batch, we've all agreed that Echo felt underutilized throughout this series. He was such an integral part of Clone Wars and the clone perspective in the Clone Wars. It just sucked that he was relegated to being this droid-type character in the Bad Batch and only had a couple moments where he really broke through, like in Season 2 when he decided to leave and go with Rex to save more clones. And here, he's pretty much the MVP of the finale outside of Omega and then Crosshair's one final shot. Going back to Crosshair, Wrecker, and Hunter, I really, really loved the fight scene with them against Hemlock's special agents, which were essentially a mirror of what the Bad Batch would have became if they didn't defect from the Empire. I thought that was a nice parallel, and the fight choreography and the fight itself was very intense. I really didn't know who would die and who would survive. Everyone did end up surviving, but Crosshair did lose his shooting hand, which I thought was a nice touch of stakes and consequences. So they get taken to Hemlock's reconditioning area, and they're basically being tortured while Omega and Echo and Emery get the Force-sensitive kids out. It was nice to see Emery finally switch sides and embrace that this is not who she is and deciding to live for herself. Echo and Omega go back for their brothers. I love, again, them rallying the clones and the fight in the room where Hunter, Crosshair, and Wrecker are being held. I really love the two levels of that fight, the maze-like labyrinth where the special operatives were fighting the clones and Echo. I thought that was really intense. I thought the lighting effects were great. Wrecker jumping in and them fighting the special operatives was really intense. I thought one of them was going to die. No one died, but again, they did a good job of creating tension and making me feel like someone was going to die. Even though I wish someone died, I think they did a good job of still having stakes in that case. Hemlock then takes Omega to the most dramatic and perfect set piece for a series finale. It was almost like this base was built to have this very climactic bridge that leads to whatever so that they could have this final standoff here. The rain starts to pour. He's locked hands with Omega. Scorch from Republic Commando, who unfortunately I don't think the Republic Commandos really got to do a lot in this show. I wish the Imperial Commandos were able to do more special operative missions. I wish they made them more intimidating. Like Scorched was just a glorified order giver. Like he never really went into battle. I think there was that one episode where he fired his blaster, but unfortunately he wasn't really used here, and he gets blown away and he dies, and it's so sad to see our boy Scorch just get tossed to the side like nothing. I feel like he was a very underutilized character in the show. Regardless, we have Hunter and Crosshair and Hemlock and Omega at the end of the bridge. We have the rain falling down. I really love that the helmets are off. It's very dramatic. It's very intense. And Crosshair sets up his weapon on Hunter's shoulder. Again, really cool, really symbolic of the brotherhood there. I think it's one of the better examples that the show has done throughout its 3 seasons. Unfortunately, it's in the finale, but it's still here. I loved it. And the moment when Omega looks at them and says, "Take the shot when I give the signal," she hits Hemlock's arm, and then she gets her little hairpin out, and that's what she's going to do to get herself away from Hemlock. And Hunter's just very calmly just like, "Wait for her. She'll tell you when to shoot." And Crosshair does his breathing exercises that she taught him. He shoots with his left hand, which isn't shaky, and he nails the shot. He shoots Hemlock. He gets dotted up and he falls off the edge. So that's the end of Hemlock, who I think was a solid villain. I think he had the demeanor of Thrawn, but he was a little bit more crazy in the fact that he was more interested in the science than maybe the more tactical side of things. But he was a competent villain, which I like. And a part of me wishes we maybe got more out of him or more backstory into him, maybe what his hand was. But that just might be me as a conditioned Star Wars fan to want more information on every single character. But I think he was used correctly here. I think he was menacing. I thought he was competent. So I enjoyed Hemlock's addition to the Star Wars universe. We then get a nice reunion with Omega, Hunter, and Crosshair. She gives Crosshair a huge hug, and they share a nice group hug. The music is beautiful. The rain, the lighting, everything just adds to a very emotional and cathartic scene, which I really enjoyed. Now, getting back to one of my main gripes, the conveniences in this episode, the Rampart and Nala Se storyline. Conceptually, this makes sense between these two characters. Nala Se doesn't want her research to lead to something terrible like Project Necromancer. It's Kaminoan property. She's always been about, Kaminoans. And Rampart is, of course, out for himself, so he would take any opportunity to save his own skin or get back within the Emperor's favor and get reinstated as an admiral. So he would try and steal the information on Project Necromancer and the research for himself. So that all makes sense. But Hemlock, really, he would keep all of his data just in that room. His data would be stored nowhere else. That is the only room where the data is. The blood samples, all of that, that's the only place. I thought that was a bit contrived, so Nalase gets her heroic death by blowing up the whole room, and Tarkin shows up and says, "Oh, the research is gone. Well, this project was a failure. Send all the money to the Death Star." I thought all of that just wrapped up a little too nicely. Obviously, some research survives in some form or fashion because we know that by Mandalorian and, of course, by The Rise of Skywalker, Palpatine does return in some form. So Project Necromancer is a success in the long run, but the destruction of this base is what causes it to be delayed 30 years until the sequel trilogy. So I understand that, but I just thought this tie-up with the Imperials and Tarkin was just way too quick, way too easy, especially since it's been built up for so many seasons that it's all just gone because of one thermal detonator. Just feels off. I don't know. I do like how it ties into the internal politics of the resource allocation between Imperial officials. Tarkin was very on board with Krennic's Death Star plans because Tarkin was someone that appreciated power. No matter how smart and cunning he was, he always appreciated power maybe more than tactical advantage. And where Thrawn disagreed with them was he was like, why would we put all of our power into one battle station? That sounds stupid. We should allocate it to give shields to all of our TIE fighters and make our TIE fighters even more effective in combat. But hubris, pride, Tarkin and Krennic were like, no, we want to put it all into this big battle station. So I like that has found its way from the books into the Bad Batch. So we end the main part of the series back on Pabu. It's being rebuilt. Emery and Echo have a conversation. It seems like Emery will be going with the Force-sensitive kids to look after them, and she'll be meeting up with Senator Chuchi and Rex and all of them. And we know that one of my predictions is that the next animated TV show will hopefully be involving Chuchi and all of this stuff, but I'll get into that a bit later. And we get our, kind of sign off with Omega and Hunter having their conversation about, the theme, the thesis of the show, choosing your own path, making your own way in the galaxy, having the freedom to make that choice, no longer being tied to duty that you didn't even pick for yourself in the first place, which is a nice continuation of the Clone Wars. I think this last scene, what I really don't like about it is that it lacks any catharsis or lines from Crosshair or Wrecker. Not that I really needed something from Wrecker, but I felt like Crosshair deserved to have some sort of line here saying, thank you for not giving up on me. Thanks for coming back for me. Thanks for keeping me a part of the squad, even when I didn't believe I deserved it anymore. I felt like that needed to be a group thing right there, or at least something to tie it up with tech and everything. I don't know. Like, it just felt abrupt that Hunter and Omega have this little conversation and then Wrecker and Crosshair just come over and have a seat and they look off into the sunset. I thought that was a little weird. I appreciate that they did the classic Star Wars widescreen, everyone in a group in one shot looking off. Like, I really love when they do that in Star Wars, like Return of the Jedi at the end, Last Jedi at the end, Rebels, we have the mural. I do enjoy when we get these family portrait style last shots. I just felt like Crosshair could have said something before we all sat down and brooded towards the sunset. So the episode ends with this nice wide shot. Again, Kevin Kiner's music is so beautiful here. It even made me get into my feels a bit and feel nostalgic about the show, even though it's not even one of my favorite Star Wars shows. I still kind of got a little emotional. I was like, oh, this is nice. This is a happy ending. We then get our dramatic fade to black and an epilogue, and we see a figure running across the cliffs on Pabu. And it took me a sec. I was like, wait, who is that? And I was like, oh, it's Omega. That's really cool. She's grown up now. And I thought initially she's going back to the same spot that Ventress asked her to come with her to train as a Force-sensitive being. And I thought that's where it was going. She turned 18 or she became an adult and she told Hunter and them, I'm going off with Asajj Ventress. I want to pursue this. But instead, she leaves to join the rebellion, which is really cool. It's a really cool ending. And I think it's an interesting full circle moment where the initial goal of the show was to choose a path that avoided war. and choosing your own path away from war. And now the end of the show is Omega choosing a path towards war, but for the right reasons, to make a difference in the galaxy, to join the rebellion. I thought that was an interesting twist that I wasn't expecting. You know, I think everyone expected the end of Bad Batch to be the ride off into the sunset, avoid war, live out their days peacefully. But I really enjoyed this moment between Hunter and Omega. Hunter was always the first father figure to her. You see he has the gray beard, he has the hunchback. There's just a nice moment between them. Again, I wish Crosshair and Wrecker had some presence in this scene. Like, they would come out of the shadows after Hunter told her, like, where are you going? Where do you think you're going? And them coming out like, hey, Omega, you're not leaving without us. Something like that. Where do you think you're going? Or something like that. But it's just her and Hunter, which I guess is full circle because Hunter was the one that took her out under his own wing. But yeah, she gets into the cockpit. We see she has Tech's glasses on the cockpit, which was so nice because Tech was the one that taught her how to fly. He taught her the Tech roll. And the first episode of The Bad Batch is her jumping into hyperspace and seeing hyperspace for the first time. That was how the premiere ended. So that was another nice full circle moment, that the finale is her jumping into hyperspace on her own terms. So conceptually, they did a good job of wrapping everything up nicely, close to the way they started things. And that's how the Bad Batch series ends. I think they've set up a lot to continue the story in another animated TV show. I've theorized the next show will be surrounding Asajj Ventress and the Hidden Path, Senator Chuchi rallying senators against Palpatine, and maybe how that feeds into the rebellion starting up. I think the clue, like I talked about before, with Echo telling Emery about Chuchi being out there and working with Rex, and Rex still being out there. You know, how does Rex get Wolf to join him and leave the Empire? How do Rex, Wolf, and Gregor all end up on a sand planet as a bunch of old guys who fish for like sandworms? You know, how does that all come about? There's a part of me that would love to see that continued, and hopefully them push the animated Star Wars TV show boundaries a bit. You know, maybe make it a longer TV show of 45 minutes an episode and have these very large multi-POV episodes where we see Chuchi for 15 minutes, we see Asajj Ventress for 15 minutes, we see 15 minutes with Rex. I really hope they push the envelope if they go in that direction. But there's another part of me that would love to see them move away from the legacy of Clone Wars animated shows. You know, every animated show outside of Resistance has followed Clone Wars in some way. Rebels is not a direct sequel, but it's very close to a direct sequel because of some of the plot threads it picks up. Bad Batch is a continuation of the Clone Wars storyline, and it would be nice if they just went a whole new direction with a new animated TV show. There's a possibility that animation is so big at this point that maybe we get two TV shows, one focusing on one thing and one focusing on something brand new. That's also a possibility. But aside from speculating about that, my final thoughts on the Bad Batch series, even though I feel it was very inconsistent, very tonally inconsistent in the fact that it didn't know what it wanted to be, whether it was a kids show with some occasional drama or an epic post-war drama about veterans and what happens when their republic that they serve turns into an empire. I think Bad Batch again solidifies that Star Wars animation continues to have the most heart out of anything that Disney has done with Star Wars since it acquired it. Even though I didn't love The Bad Batch, even though it's my least favorite of the three main animated TV shows, it still had the heart and it had the feeling of Star Wars by the end of it. When this series ended, I was like, that was a piece of Star Wars. Even if I didn't love it, I still felt the magic of Star Wars by the end of that show. And I think that's something that live action still needs to consistently get. I think it's there when we talk about Mando season 1 and 2. Andor for a different reason, because I wouldn't say Andor is that like feel good Star Wars heart, but it is that hopeful piece of Star Wars, you know, the really dark Star Wars with the little pieces of hope, like in Revenge of the Sith. But I think Bad Batch fulfills its duty in continuing the legacy of Star Wars animation just being so good at understanding what makes Star Wars. And even when it failed plot-wise or it failed in the writing department, it still had the themes and the feeling of Star Wars by the end of it, which some people may write off and say, oh, well, if it's not good, it's not good. You can't just give it extra points for that. But this is a Star Wars podcast. I feel like I'm a Star Wars expert, and I feel like a lot of people have echoed that as well. Echo. Shout out to Echo. I feel like a lot of people have echoed that. It does have the feeling that Star Wars is always trying to replicate from the original trilogy. So with that, I think I'll wrap this up right here. Bad Batch, again, I appreciate you for being my first... that sounds really weird. I appreciate you for being my first TV show that I reviewed week to week on this podcast 3 years ago. And I'll always, have a special place in my heart, my Star Wars heart, for this TV show, seeing it through from beginning to end on here with this podcast with you guys along the way for the journey. Do I think I'll ever rewatch Bad Batch? I don't know. It doesn't have the same feeling that I get when I want to watch Clone Wars or Rebels, but there are definitely pieces of the Bad Batch that I want to experience again and would maybe go back to watch certain episodes again, like Solitary Clone, like Truth and Consequence, like the finale of season 2, maybe the premiere episode. There are some good moments in here that I would definitely want to revisit someday. And maybe through a rewatch, I actually appreciate the Bad Batch a bit more. I don't think that's true because there are way too many Monster of the Week episodes in here, but I definitely see myself revisiting some parts of the Bad Batch in the future. So thank you guys so much. If you have been here since my first Star Wars Bad Batch review and you're here now, I appreciate you so much. If you've joined along the way and have only listened to maybe 1 or 2 of these reviews, I also appreciate you. Please leave a rating, review on whatever streaming platform you're listening to it on. Tell all your friends, anyone that you know that enjoys Star Wars. I'm sure I have something on my channel that they would be interested in. Word of mouth is the best way to get this podcast out there. But as always, thank you guys so much for listening. Stay safe, stay healthy, and may the Force be with you. The mission's complete. Peace.